Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
New Year's morning always looked the same at my parents' house. The smell of cinnamon rolls and eggs baked in cream, the fake fireplace video playing on repeat, and Dad's ridiculous happy fiscal year joke that he'd recycle like it was still funny. We'd all gather around the heavy oak table in that same over-decorated dining room, pretending it wasn't just another performance. The family brunch was our yearly ritual. Scripted smiles, forced toasts, and sweeping everything unpleasant under the Persian rug. But this time, something in the air felt different, like someone had loaded the place with dynamite, and we were just waiting to hear the match strike. Dad was already halfway through his second mimosa when he stood up with that classic performative sigh, like he was too modest for the attention he was clearly craving. His gray sweater had a mustard stain near the hem, probably from the deviled eggs he'd been taste testing all morning. My mom, Martha, gave him the usual, half-annoyed glance, already bracing for a speech. My younger sister Emily leaned back in her chair, twirling her spoon like she was bored with life itself. And me? I just kept buttering my roll, making sure I didn't lock eyes with anyone too long. Dad tapped his fork against his glass. "I want to say a few words, if that's all right." No one ever told him no. This family's been through a lot the last couple years, and I think it's time we turn the page. My stomach tightened, because whenever Dad said turn the page, it usually meant he was about to rewrite history in his favor. I felt the old familiar tension creep up my neck, the kind that starts as a tickle and ends up a full-body ache. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thin white envelope. "Emily," he said, holding it out to her like it was the goddamn Nobel Prize. "You've had your share of bumps in the road, kiddo, but we believe in second chances." Emily took the envelope with that same lazy smirk she always wore when she knew she was about to be handed something she didn't deserve. She slid her thumb under the flap, eyes scanning quickly, and then, the dramatic gasp almost on cue. "Oh my God, Dad." I already knew what it was. I'd seen the confirmation email by accident a few days earlier when I went to print something on his office computer. A one-way first-class ticket to Barcelona, a new apartment rental deposit, a note from him that read, "Let this be the clean slate you need, Pumpkin. Pumpkin, Jesus!" She squealed and hugged him, knocking over her water glass. My mom clapped politely, then said something about how Europe changes you. A phrase she'd lifted from some lifestyle magazine article she read last summer. I smiled, nodded, even offered a quiet, "That's amazing," just loud enough to be heard, but flat enough not to sound thrilled. Nobody noticed. They never did, but then my mom turned to me. "Sweetie, yours is the gold one, right?" She was sorting through the envelopes on the table like they were misplaced holiday cards. I almost opened it by mistake. She handed it to me with a chuckle. I blinked. "Gold one?" "I put little star stickers on them so we wouldn't mix them up," she said. "Right." I opened mine slowly, giving the impression of indifference, though I knew exactly what she was about to find. Inside wasn't a ticket, wasn't a gift card or some inspirational note. It was an unmarked printout, a stack of stapled pages. And right on the front, bold font, large date, and a subject line that read, "Your wife deserves to know." My mother's fingers paused mid-swipe across the page. Her smile faltered, then disappeared completely. She kept reading, each word pulling the blood from her face like a slow leak in a boat. "What is this?" she asked, her voice low, almost unrecognizable. Emily was still babbling about tapas and flamenco classes, oblivious. My father looked from Mom to me, the confusion spreading across his face like fog rolling in. "I said, what is this?" she repeated, louder now. Dad leaned over to see. His eyes narrowed. I stayed silent. That moment, the second before everything collapsed, felt endless. You know how some people say their lives flash before their eyes in times of crisis? For me, it was the opposite. My mind went razor sharp. I noticed the stain on Dad's shirt again, the way Mom's hands trembled just slightly, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen behind us. She flipped the page. There was a photo now, a hotel receipt, a chain of emails, screenshots. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. I met her eyes, finally, calm, cold. "It came to me anonymously," I said, knowing full well the lie wouldn't last long. I'd made sure the trail was traceable, just slow enough to give me time to enjoy the look on their faces. Emily had stopped talking. The silence wrapped around the table like a noose. She glanced at me, then at the envelope still in Mom's hand, then back at me. "Is this a joke?" she asked, her voice tight. "Nope," I said, "not even a little." I stood up then, walked slowly toward the kitchen, like I needed to get another drink, like my hands weren't shaking under the surface. But I didn't pour anything. I just stood behind the counter, watching the three of them sit in the shambles of their happy holiday narrative. My mother was still holding the envelope, though now like it might bite her. My dad had gone quiet, which for him meant he knew whatever was coming next. He couldn't control. And Emily, she didn't even look at the contents. She didn't have to. She already knew what she'd done. What she never expected was that I would finally do something about it. And this was only the beginning. Because when a family spends years asking you to clean up everyone else's mess, there comes a day, one glorious, quiet day, when you decide to drop the mop and let the whole damn thing rot. Next New Year, I figured, someone else could host brunch. And maybe this time, the fireworks would be real. 3 Christmases ago, I found myself alone in a Walgreens parking lot at 2 a.m, with my bank account overdrafted by $400 and my phone vibrating nonstop with calls I had no intention of answering. It had been sleeting for hours, the kind of Midwest winter drizzle that doesn't quite commit to snow, but leaves everything slick, gray, and mean. I sat behind the wheel of my Honda, engine off to save gas, wrapped in a scratchy blanket from the trunk, waiting for a man named Rudy, who, according to my sister, only dealt in cash and always arrived late. She said he liked parking lots because there were no cameras. I didn't ask how she knew that. I already knew too much. Earlier that night, Emily had shown up on my doorstep in the middle of our family's annual Christmas Eve dinner, mascara streaked across her face, clutching a broken purse like it was life support. She smelled like gin and panic. I had just stepped outside to take the trash to the bin when I saw her standing on the porch, half frozen and trying to light a cigarette with shaking hands. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her. We hadn't spoken in almost 4 months, not since the infamous accident when my necklace went missing, the one Grandma B had left me, the only piece of her I had, and then reappeared in Emily's gym bag a week later with no explanation. Of course, Dad made me apologize for accusing her. He said I'd overreacted, that Emily was going through something. She was always going through something. Some people go through jobs, some go through men. Emily went through second chances like Tic Tacs. "Can I come in?" she'd asked, shivering. Her lipstick was smeared, and one of her heels was broken. I hadn't even invited her inside. I just moved out of the way and let her stumble past me, right into the living room where my parents were mid-toast. The room went silent. No one said a word for a full 5 seconds, the kind of silence that makes your stomach knot up and your palms sweat. Mom finally whispered her name like it was some kind of sacred relic returned from the war. "Emily." She didn't even acknowledge them. She just looked at me and said, "I need your help." That was all it took. An hour later, I was watching her from my car, parked 2 spaces away, as she handed Rudy a wad of cash I'd pulled off my credit card. She was crying and shaking and kept saying, "He's gonna hurt me," over and over like it was a song lyric. When I asked who he was, she went quiet. I knew she wouldn't tell me the whole truth, and honestly, I didn't need it. I knew the pattern by now. Some man, some lie, some mess. I was always the janitor. What no one in the family knew was that Christmas dinner ended not with carols or hot cocoa, but with me silently driving Emily back to her apartment and tucking her in like a damn child, only to come home and find my own presents unopened under the tree. My parents acted like it hadn't even happened. They didn't ask where I'd gone or why Emily had vanished again. Mom said she probably needed some space. Dad said, "Let's not make this a thing." It was always me who was making it a thing. That night, I stayed up until dawn, replaying the look in Emily's eyes when I handed her the money. It wasn't gratitude, it wasn't relief, it was entitlement. Like, of course I was going to bail her out. Of course I was going to fix it. That's what I did, wasn't it? Over the next year, things didn't get better. They got quieter. Emily stopped calling, which was honestly a relief. And Mom decided to act like nothing had happened. Dad became more distant, throwing himself into work like that could somehow buffer him from responsibility. I tried to rebuild my life, paid off my card, joined a running group, even started seeing someone, a guy named Mark who didn't know anything about my family, and I liked it that way. For a few months, I let myself believe that maybe I could live a life not orbiting Emily's chaos, but that illusion didn't last long. Emily resurfaced just before Thanksgiving the following year. She posted a selfie on Instagram with a brand new purse, a luxury label that I knew she couldn't afford unless she'd either scammed someone or slept with them. My mom immediately commented with, "Looking radiant, sweetheart," while Dad double-tapped like a teenage boy thirsting over a model. I watched the post rack up comments from her friends, the usual group of yoga instructors, bartenders, and girls with job titles like creative lifestyle curator. Meanwhile, I was working 70 hours a week in a consulting firm where the only lifestyle I curated was surviving deadlines. That December, I decided I wouldn't come home for Christmas. I told my parents I had a project due. That was the year I stayed in the city, bought myself takeout Thai food, and watched Die Hard 3 times in a row. It was the most peaceful holiday I'd had in over a decade. No drama, no fake toasts, no Emily. But peace only lasts so long when your entire family is a house of cards built on lies and denial. By the time the next New Year rolled around, Emily was back in town, and our parents were pretending it was some kind of personal growth retreat. They invited me to brunch like nothing had ever happened, like I wasn't the one who had quietly prevented a felony by paying off her drug dealer in a freezing parking lot. That was the first moment I realized something permanent had shifted inside me. I was done being the one who fixed things, done being quiet, done covering tracks. So when I saw that ticket confirmation on Dad's computer the week before New Year's, and realized he was shipping Emily off to Spain with a full ride and no consequences, something in me cracked, but it didn't break. It hardened. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I just made a few copies, asked a few questions, and did what I do best, handled it. Only this time, I didn't handle it for her. I handled it for me. And whether they liked it or not, this time they were all going to see exactly what it looked like when the family fixer flipped the damn script. I didn't sleep the night before brunch, not because I was nervous. That would imply I was unsure, and I was the exact opposite of unsure. What kept me up wasn't fear or even anticipation, but a kind of quiet, burning satisfaction that hummed beneath my skin like a second heartbeat. I had waited years for this moment, years of swallowing disappointment with a smile, of letting slight slide off me like rain on glass. I had learned the choreography of our family, when to nod, when to speak, when to disappear, and I had followed the steps so flawlessly that no one ever thought I might rewrite the dance. But now, finally, the rhythm was mine. The documents had been printed at a little 24-hour print shop 2 neighborhoods away, the kind where the clerk doesn't ask questions, and the cameras are conveniently always under maintenance. I had walked there in the middle of the night a few days before brunch, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses like someone in a bad spy movie, and handed over a flash drive without saying a word. The man didn't even glance at the files. He just printed, stapled, and slid the stack into a plain manila envelope, sealing it with a press of his wide palm. It felt almost sacred, a holy relic encased in cardboard. Except instead of delivering salvation, I was delivering judgment. Inside were emails, text threads, screenshots, hotel receipts, and one particularly damning photo taken in a parking garage outside a downtown hotel. It showed Emily, unmistakably Emily, arms around a man's neck, lips nearly touching, eyes closed in the kind of kiss that isn't new or accidental. The man? And this is where the real sting came in, was Brian, married, father of 2, our cousin Tasha's husband. The same Tasha who had spent every Thanksgiving for the last decade making sweet potato casserole from scratch. The same Tasha who had driven Emily home from the ER when she sprained her ankle last spring, and who still sent me birthday cards even after I stopped replying to them. The emails between Emily and Brian were worse than anything I could have imagined. They weren't just salacious. They were smug, dripping with entitlement and a kind of adolescent recklessness that didn't even attempt to hide. One message read, "I can't wait till I don't have to sneak around anymore. She doesn't even ask questions." Another, dated only a week before the New Year's brunch, said, "Spain sounds perfect. Maybe I'll come with you for the first week." That one was the final nail, the point at which I stopped feeling conflicted and started planning. I didn't just want Emily to face consequences. I wanted her to be seen for who she really was, not by me because I had known for years, but by the people who kept choosing not to look. I wanted my parents to have to sit in it, to feel the weight of the daughter they had built a pedestal for crumbling beneath her own shallow decisions. And I wanted to do it in the most deliberate way possible, not with an explosion, but with a whisper, not in the heat of a fight, but in the cold silence of realization. That morning, I woke early, dressed carefully, chose a dark green sweater that brought out my eyes, applied mascara with slow, intentional strokes. I didn't want to look angry. I wanted to look calm, untouchable. I wanted them to remember me that way. When I arrived at the house, everything was exactly as expected. Dad was setting the table like he was preparing for a presidential visit. Mom was fluffing napkins and muttering about how cinnamon makes everything feel more festive. And Emily breezed in 20 minutes late, wearing a white knit dress that made her look like some kind of Scandinavian saint. She hugged everyone with exaggerated warmth, kissed Mom on the cheek, and gave me a little wink like we were co-conspirators in a shared joke. That wink almost made me laugh. Almost. The envelopes were already on the table when we sat down, each one labeled with a small gold sticker, mine deliberately the most unassuming. I waited through the toast, through the ticket reveal, through the squeals and hugs and clapping. I waited as Emily bragged about how Barcelona would be so healing, how she needed a total reset, how she might just stay forever. I waited until my mother, almost as an afterthought, reached for the envelope with my name. There was a second, a beautiful, suspended second, when the page turned and the color left her face. One else had seen what she had yet, but I had. I watched her eyes scan the lines, her lips tighten, her hand tremble as she reached the second page and saw the photo. She didn't say anything, just passed the envelope to my father like she was handing over a grenade. My father took it with a frown, flipping through the first few pages with growing confusion. He froze at the same place, the garage photo, and looked up at me with a mix of disbelief and fury. Not at Emily, not at what she'd done, at me, for breaking the silence, for daring to make a mess of his carefully constructed house of cards. Emily, still caught in her performance, finally noticed the change in atmosphere. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp and defensive. Mom didn't answer. Dad didn't answer. The room had gone so quiet, I could hear the tick of the wall clock. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and said, without raising my voice, "You might want to give Tasha a call." That was the moment the truth stopped being mine alone to carry. The moment I passed the burden back where it belonged. Emily's face twisted, a mix of panic and calculation, as though she were trying to figure out whether to deny or distract or beg. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted between our parents, then to me. I held her gaze without blinking. "I didn't," she started, but stopped, because she knew she had. And worse, she knew I had proof. The brilliance of the moment was in its stillness. There were no raised voices, no slammed fists, just the slow unraveling of years of denial, a quiet horror sinking into everyone's bones. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just watched. They all looked at me differently after that. Not angry, not exactly, but wary, like they were seeing someone who had always been there but never really known. someone who had stopped playing the role and started writing her own lines. And the best part? We still hadn't even reached dessert. It was hard to say exactly when my father's face changed. When the practiced calm he always wore. That mild-mannered country club charm he used like a weapon, finally cracked under the weight of what was in his hands. It didn't happen in a single flash of anger or an outburst, not the way you'd expect. Instead, it was slower, heavier, like watching a stone wall develop a hairline fracture that only deepens the longer you stare. His shoulders stiffened, his mouth tightened, but his eyes, those dull gray eyes that had always seen only what they wanted, began to register something he could no longer blink away. And still he said nothing. For a moment, no one spoke. My mother stared at the printouts in front of her like they were written in another language, her lips twitching, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Emily had gone from smug to silent, frozen in the middle of a performance she no longer controlled. The girl who could usually cry on cue, who once faked a panic attack to get out of jury duty, now just sat there as the air turned cold and heavy around her. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her eyes flicking between us, waiting for someone to speak first. But the room was still. It was my father who finally broke the silence, and what he said wasn't an apology or a denial or even a defense of his youngest daughter. No, what he said was worse in its familiarity. The line he had used more times than I could count. From the time I was 11 and Emily had crashed Mom's car, trying to buy beer, to the night she stole my rent money and swore she'd give it back. We're not going to make this into something bigger than it is. That sentence hit like a slap. Not just because it was insulting, but because of how practiced it was, how easily it came to his lips. Even now, staring down printed proof that Emily had been having an affair with our cousin's husband and planning to escape halfway across the world on his dime, he couldn't help but minimize it. To him, the problem wasn't what Emily had done. It was that I had forced everyone to see it. My mother looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw something in her face I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. It wasn't shock or anger or fear. It was recognition, as if she had finally reached the same conclusion I had drawn long ago, the same bitter truth I had buried and danced around and tried to forget. This was never just about Emily. It never had been. This isn't about the affair, I said, my voice flat and deliberate. This is about the fact that no matter what she does, you protect her, always, even when it costs everyone else. My father didn't meet my eyes. He shifted in his chair, then folded the envelope closed with a precise, almost ritualistic motion. She made a mistake. She's made hundreds, I said, louder now, and you've cleaned up every single one, no matter who got hurt. Do you even hear yourself? Emily made a noise then, a low, wounded sound like a dog that's been stepped on. But I didn't flinch. I kept my gaze locked on our father, waiting for something, anything resembling an acknowledgement. I didn't get one, but my mother did something unexpected. She stood, her movements were slow, almost too careful, and for a second I wondered if she was about to faint. Instead, she walked to the head of the table, placed both hands on the back of my father's chair, and looked down at him. When she spoke, her voice was cold steel wrapped in velvet. "She deserves to know," she said. "Tasha, she has a right." Dad shook his head. "There's no need to drag the whole family into this. It'll only what?" she snapped. "Ruin the illusion?" He didn't answer, but I saw the muscles in his jaw twitch. That was when I realized I wasn't the only one who had been keeping quiet all these years. My mother had known, at least parts of it. Maybe not the affair with Brian, but the pattern, the rot, the fact that her marriage had long ago stopped being a partnership and become a damage control operation. She had known, and she had swallowed it over and over because that's what women like her were taught to do. To keep the peace, hold the line, play nice even when the walls were crumbling. But something had shifted now. Something irreversible. Emily stood up finally, like she'd been holding her breath for hours and couldn't take it anymore. She looked from me to Dad to Mom. And then she did what she always did when backed into a corner. She reached for the nuclear option. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice shaking. "That's why I need to go. That's why I need a fresh start." The room froze again. It was my father who reacted first, a low, "Jesus Christ," escaping him like a prayer he didn't believe in. My mother looked stunned, as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. I didn't move. I just blinked once. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and for once I couldn't tell if they were real or part of the performance. Maybe both. "I didn't want to tell you this way," she whispered, "but you all just kept pushing." "Is it Brian's?" I asked, interrupting her. Her head snapped toward me. "What?" "You heard me." She didn't answer. For a moment I thought she might lie. I could see it forming behind her eyes, the scramble for something believable, something forgivable, but nothing came. Just silence. And that was answer enough. My mother sat back down. My father, for the first time in my life, looked afraid, not angry, not frustrated, afraid. I stood then. I had nothing left to say, nothing worth explaining. They would spin this however they wanted, try to repair what was already in ruins. But I had done what I came to do. I had forced them to look. I had handed them the mirror and refused to let them turn away. And they hated me for it. Not because I was wrong, but because I was finally right out loud. The funny thing about destruction is that it doesn't always look like fire and noise and chaos. Sometimes it's quieter than a breath, a slow crumbling of something that once felt solid but was hollow from the start. By the time I stepped away from the table, everything in that room had already fallen apart. Even if the chandelier still sparkled and the brunch casserole still steamed beside untouched champagne flutes. I walked to the window and stared out into the yard, where the snow had started to fall again. Soft and slow, covering the garden like it was trying to erase what had been there just moments before. Behind me, no one moved. I could feel their silence pressing against my back like a hand that wasn't mine. My mother was the first to rise after me. She didn't speak. She simply took her napkin off her lap, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table like she was closing a chapter. Her eyes didn't meet mine, nor did they seek out Emily or my father. She walked to the hallway, pulled on her coat without hesitation, and left without saying goodbye. The sound of the front door closing was softer than I expected, almost gentle, but it echoed through the dining room like the slam of a gavel. No one chased her. No one dared. Emily sank into her seat again, as if all the energy had finally drained from her, the way it always did when the spotlight shifted and she was forced to face what came next. She stared down at her plate, still full, her fork untouched, her breath shallow and uneven. I could tell she wanted someone, anyone, to save her. But for once there was no lifeline. There were no excuses left to hand her like candy, no story to spin or arms to fall into. For the first time in her life, she was going to sit with it. My father finally stood, slower than I expected, as if something in his knees had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He looked at Emily with a mixture of regret and something almost like pity, then turned to me with a face so empty of emotion it might as well have been carved from wood. He opened his mouth like he was about to speak, like he had one last card to play. Some final sermon to deliver about family or forgiveness or how none of this should have happened like this. But then he closed it. He just looked at me, eyes flat, lips pressed tight, and nodded once. A small, reluctant acknowledgement, like a man saluting his rival after losing the war. "I didn't ask for any of this," Emily finally said, her voice cracking under the weight of everything she could no longer hold up. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way." I turned to face her, leaning against the windowsill, arms crossed but loose. "You didn't ask for it," I said calmly. "But you also never once refused it. Every time someone offered you an escape, you took it, no questions asked. Every time someone paid your debt, you disappeared like it never happened. Every time I swallowed my pride to protect you, you turned around and made the same mess all over again. You never meant for it to happen, sure, but you never did a single thing to stop it either." She blinked, tears finally spilling over, but I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. I had done that too many times before, and it always ended the same way. Me broke and bruised and alone, while she got handed another chance wrapped in forgiveness and denial. She opened her mouth again, but I held up my hand. "Don't," I said, "just don't." There wasn't anything left to say, not really. Words wouldn't patch the cracks in our family or undo what had been exposed. There would be fallout, of course. Calls made in hushed tones, damage control behind closed doors, alliances shifting like tectonic plates. Maybe my father would find some way to justify it all to himself, spin it into a narrative where he was the victim of circumstance and not the architect of our family's silence. Maybe my mother would disappear into her garden or her yoga classes or whatever quiet life she could salvage. Maybe Emily would still board that flight to Spain, only this time it wouldn't be a gift. It would be an escape from a room that no longer had a seat for her. As for me, I didn't feel victorious. Revenge never really tastes sweet. It just stops tasting bitter. I felt tired. Not sad, not guilty, not relieved. Just tired. Like I had finally set down a suitcase I didn't realize I'd been carrying for most of my life. I didn't regret what I had done. Not the timing, not the method, not the silence I broke with surgical precision. What I did wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of years of being asked to absorb the damage without ever receiving so much as a thank you. It was justice in a way, and whether they liked it or not, it was overdue. I walked back to the table, poured myself a final mimosa, the last one I'd ever drink in that house, and took a slow sip. The citrus stung my tongue, but the burn was welcome. I looked around the room one final time, memorizing the faces, the expressions, the remnants of a holiday that would never be remembered for its casseroles or toasts or family photos. This was the year everything changed. Not because I wanted it to, but because I had stopped pretending it shouldn't. Emily stood eventually, but I didn't watch her leave. I didn't ask where she was going or if she was coming back. I didn't care. I had done my part. I had told the truth finally, and let it detonate in the middle of their carefully staged world. They could do whatever they wanted with the ruins. As I opened the front door and stepped into the cold, the snow was still falling, heavier now, the kind of snow that muffles sound and makes everything feel distant. I pulled my coat tighter, felt the sharp air fill my lungs, and started walking. I didn't say goodbye, not because I was angry or proud or vindictive, but because I didn't want them to think I still needed to. Some endings don't require closure. Some stories are finished the moment you decide you're not the one who's going to fix the next mess. And that morning, with my footprints the only ones in the snow behind me, I knew I would never set foot in that house again. Not for brunch, not for holidays, not even if they begged. Let them toast without me. Let them smile into the camera and pretend it all never happened. Let them sit around the table next year and wonder when it all changed. They'll know. Deep down, they'll know. And I won't need to say a word.